The exclave of Kaliningrad has always presented a threat to the rest of Europe. Owned by Russia but separated from the mainland, it's a wild card that could end up being the dagger that Russia attempts to stab into the European heart. NATO needs to be ready, and the US is leading the charge to make sure that it is. Kaliningrad is on edge as Poland has welcomed the US 2nd Cavalry Regiment into the country. Armed to the teeth and ready to fight, the regiment working near Kaliningrad sends a clear message to Vladimir Putin. NATO is preparing for whatever Russia has planned. In August, the US Marines military YouTube channel reported that troops from America's 2nd Cavalry Regiment had started rolling into the Polish city of Orzysz. Arriving as part of NATO's Enhanced Forward Presence Operation, or EFP, the soldiers are helping to bolster NATO's eastern flank defenses by training a multinational team of NATO counterparts stationed in Poland. The reason why is simple, says the US Marines military channel. The Ukraine war is expected to escalate in 2025, and it may end up encompassing more of Europe. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment reported its entry into Poland on its Facebook page, explaining what it will be doing while stationed in the country. US Army soldiers from 2nd Cavalry Regiment supported Task Force Iron during the culminating CUAS exercise. Project Flytrap and Bemavo Piski training area, Poland, the post says. Project Flytrap is part of ongoing US-UK efforts to test new CUAS technologies and tactics that will shape future Allied operations. We'll dig a little deeper into what CUAS technologies and Project Flytrap mean later in the video. For now, it's enough to know that the 2nd Cavalry Regiment took part in joint training exercises with their Polish and UK counterparts, along with combat simulations and exercises that saw them integrate air and ground defenses to combat one of the biggest threats Russia now poses to NATO's eastern flank: drones. The US Marines military channel adds that this latest deployment was accompanied by the addition of HIMARS mobile artillery rocket systems, advanced radar systems, and Stryker combat vehicles. It's all about strengthening NATO's defenses in Eastern Europe. And that brings us back to the EFP we mentioned a little earlier. According to NATO, the organization's presence in the East is a key part of its strengthened deterrence and defense posture. Created in 2017, just 3 years after Russia annexed Crimea, the EFP has become a NATO priority ever since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment's training focused on the EFP. However, this doesn't mean that the regiment is becoming a permanent fixture of the operation. As NATO explains, the EFP comprises 8 forward land forces, each of which is a multinational battle group made up of volunteer soldiers from NATO ally nations. Those groups rotate and work together with the national home defense forces in their host countries to provide an ever-present deterrent against anybody who might think about invading those countries. And by anybody, we of course mean Putin. Today, troops and personnel from NATO allies serve, train, and exercise together in the east of the alliance, representing a strong expression of unity and solidarity, NATO explains. Forces from contributing nations rotate in and out of the battle groups. At any given time, they may be deployed to battle groups or stationed in their home countries with the ability to deploy rapidly if needed. US Marines military offers a few more details, noting that the purpose of the EFP has evolved over time. When it was created, the operation was more of a symbolic deterrent against potential threats, rather than an active and dangerous force. It was a message sent to Putin that NATO could see what he'd done in Crimea and that it was taking steps to ensure he wouldn't be able to do the same elsewhere. However, it wasn't until the full-blown invasion of Ukraine and the revelations about how Russia approaches wars against other nations that resulted that the EFP gained true direction. The operation morphed from one focused on symbolism to a true deterrent made up of an active and combat-ready military force. Task Force Iron is part of that new deterrent. Led by the US military's 1st Armored Division, according to the Defense Visual Information Distribution Service, or DVIDS, Task Force Iron provides combat-credible forces to 8 countries. All of this is done as part of America's forward deployment in Europe, with the 8 countries Task Force Iron works with having been chosen based on the most immediate threats presented to them. Now that task force is training in Poland, and the 2nd Cavalry Regiment has joined the task force to bolster its strength and ensure NATO's EFP operation can become the deterrent it needs to be against a potential Russian invasion. Poland is certainly happy to welcome more US troops to its border near Kaliningrad. The Polish Defense Minister, Władysław Marcin Kosiniak-Kamysz, lauded what the arrival of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment means in a statement. "We will never stand alone in the face of threats," Kosiniak-Kamysz declared. "Every inch of NATO is a shared responsibility." That's the point. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment arriving in Poland for a training exercise is far more than a US show of force or a boost to Poland's border defenses. It's NATO as a collective defense organization demonstrating to Russia that all of its members are working and training together to prepare for anything that Putin might throw at them. It's also just one example of many that have seen the US work alongside its NATO allies for training exercises in Poland. Just a few weeks before the 2nd Cavalry Regiment linked up with Task Force Iron, US soldiers supporting that regiment took part in a live fire exercise at the same Bemowo-Piski training area that the 2nd Cavalry Regiment is now working on. David says that these exercises include troops from the US 1st Battalion, 64th Armored Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, and 1st Armored Brigade Combat Team. Those soldiers partnered with members of Poland's 15th Mechanized Brigade in the UK's 1st Royal Yorkshire Regiment for a week-long exercise focused on demonstrating a collective ability to quickly respond to and eliminate threats. Davids provides a day-by-day breakdown. The soldiers from all participating countries first gathered around a sand table, where they planned and rehearsed their roles. What followed was several days of passage of lines exercises, in which soldiers worked in passing units to advance upon and engage enemy targets with supportive fire. These exercises exist to showcase how a passing unit can help a stationary unit to advance or withdraw from a battle. Advancing was the goal in this particular exercise. Polish forces riding BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicles took part in live-fire exercises, advancing toward an enemy area to locate hostiles. After engaging the hostile targets, the Polish forces were tasked with reporting to the US contingent, which followed up on the advance. Operating M1A2V3 Abrams main battle tanks, those soldiers advanced past the line the Polish troops established, firing their M256 cannons on the hostile position as they did so. The exercise was a massive success. US Army Staff Sergeant Helen Dieguez commented on how well drilled the Polish forces proved themselves to be. "We realized how hard these guys train and how well prepared they are," Dieguez said. "They knew exactly what they had to do and how to do it. Seeing them drive down the trails with their BMP, they know the terrain and they move like they own it. All of us are just mesmerized by how they maneuver." There's an interesting point buried within that statement. It's sometimes easy to forget that NATO is a collective of over 30 nations, all of which have their own militaries and training techniques. That can sometimes make it difficult to see the forest for all the trees when it comes to cooperation. This exercise, which took place a couple of weeks before the 2nd Cavalry Regiment arrived in Poland, was an eye-opener for all involved. A chance to not only showcase their skills, but to better understand what their allies bring to the table. Gaps can be plugged, respect can be earned. Cooperation becomes more than just a word. So it's clear that the EFP is helping NATO to bolster its Eastern European defenses, with the US's help. Now, let's come back to the 2nd Cavalry Regiment and the concepts of Project Flytrap and CUAS technologies that we mentioned earlier in the video. While the exercise we just covered focused on Task Force Iron working alongside Polish troops in ground operations, Project Flytrap focuses on countering drones. That's what CUAS is all about. It means counter-unmanned aerial system, and the last several months have seen the US working alongside its NATO allies to figure out how to fight against Russia's growing drone army. David says that Project Flytrap involves US and UK soldiers training with new anti-drone technology on training grounds in both Poland and Germany. It's these exercises in which the 2nd Cavalry Regiment was involved in July. Army Times says the 2nd Cavalry Regiment worked alongside the UK's 1st Royal Yorkshire Regiment, which you may remember from the previous training exercise. It seems that the UK is taking its NATO commitments very seriously. The same outlet notes that more than 40 companies and around 400 military industry representatives also took part in the exercise, along with partners from Poland, Australia, and other allied nations. This wasn't some small discussion about how to deal with drones. It was a show of force near Kaliningrad that showcased how the US and its NATO allies are preparing to deal with the drone threat that Russia presents. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment's commander, Colonel Donald Neal Jr., explained why these exercises needed to take place. "Developing, testing, and fielding CUAS technologies together with our NATO allies and partners enhances our deterrence capability," Neal Jr. said. "Training and experimentation with our allies and partners serve to build capacity and increased European leadership in European security, effectively strengthening the NATO alliance." While this is vague military speak in some respects, it's easy to read between the lines. NATO is very aware of Russia's growing reliance on drones, and it needs to prepare for a potential future in which Putin sends those drones beyond Ukraine's borders and into countries like Poland. Army Times points out that a key takeaway from the exercise in which the 2nd Cavalry Regiment took part was the need to create layered defenses against drones. "There's no one system or one solution to counter UAS, Neal Jr. explained. "The counter UAS capability we'll have in the future is going to have to be an integrated, multi-system solution. Layers upon layers are vital. We saw that in the exercise itself, which experimented with what is known as a striker infantry formation. This formation sees soldiers on the ground wearing radio frequency technology that's capable of detecting and jamming the electronic systems of drones. That's the first layer. The second layer comes into play when soldiers arrive using M4s to shoot down the enemy drones that manage to break through the jamming. And behind those troops is a third layer of operators sending their own unmanned aerial vehicles to counter the incoming drones. These types of layered approaches aren't something that soldiers can come up with on the fly. They need to be experimented with, drilled, learned across the board. That's why the 2nd Cavalry Regiment was in Poland. It, along with the other NATO allies that took part in the exercise, was helping to figure out what the defense against Russian drones will end up looking like if Putin decides to cast his invasion net beyond Ukraine. There's no denying that drones represent one of Russia's biggest threats in any future war with NATO. As CNN reported on August 8th, Russia is building massive drone factories that are allowing it to domesticate most of its drone production. Doing so leaves its partner Iran in the cold. If it wasn't for Iran, Russia wouldn't even know how to build the Shahid drones it's now building in such massive volumes. But Putin won't care about that potential alienation. To him, the most important thing is that Russia keeps building more and more drones. How many more? RBC Ukraine reports that the head of the Ukraine Situational Center at Germany's Ministry of Defense, Christian Freuding, believes that Russia is trying to grow its drone manufacturing to the point where it could launch 2,000 drones per day at Ukraine. It's not there yet, but Russia is breaking records for its drone strikes in 2025. According to ABC, July saw Russia fire 6,443 drones and missiles into Ukraine, which was 13% more than it launched in June, along with being the highest combined monthly total seen during the Ukraine war to date. These numbers aren't escaping NATO's attention. Project Flytrap becomes even more vital when you realize that it's a response to a very legitimate threat that is developing within Russia. Today, Putin is pushing for 2,000 drones per day that Russia can launch at Ukraine. Tomorrow, those 2,000 drones per day, and many more besides, may have their attention turned toward the likes of Poland and the Baltics. That's why CUAS is so important. And it's also why the US sent the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, and will likely send more soldiers in the future, to train in Poland and near Kaliningrad. What all of this may mean for the future also needs to be considered, and we may as well start with Kaliningrad, seeing as we've just mentioned the Russian exclave. Kaliningrad is an interesting piece of territory. Separated from the Russian mainland, it's always held value to Russia as a transportation hub. Kaliningrad provides a connection to Poland and the Baltic states as it borders both Poland and Lithuania. It also offers Russia one of its few ice-free ports that lead into the Baltic Sea, which is why the region was once home of the Baltic Fleet. During the Soviet era, Kaliningrad essentially served as a buffer separating the Baltic states from the West, LSM says. Later, it became something of a connector between East and West. But things changed when Poland and Lithuania decided to join NATO. Threatened by this, Russia has militarized Kaliningrad to the point where it has around 25,000 soldiers stationed in the exclave. There are also rumors that Russia is storing around 100 nuclear warheads in Kaliningrad, along with the missiles needed to launch them. In short, Kaliningrad has evolved from being something of an oddity within the Russian Federation into an exclave that provides Putin with opportunities to strike Poland and the Baltic states. Kaliningrad could even become the launching pad for a full-blown war against NATO, and it seems to be practically common sense that if such an invasion is on Putin's mind, he'll start shipping scores of drones to the exclave if he wins in Ukraine. Those drones will threaten NATO's eastern flank. Poland has been preparing for a potential invasion from Kaliningrad by fortifying its border with the exclave as part of its East Shield initiative. In November 2024, the Kyiv Independent reported that those fortifications are part of a $2.5 billion project that also encompasses Poland's eastern border with Belarus, which is a Russian ally. Now, with Project Flytrap, Poland, the US, and their NATO allies are preparing for the possibility that those fortifications could be broken. If drones do come flying into Poland and the Baltics via Kaliningrad, NATO's CUAS training will mean it's in a better position to do something about them than it would have been just a few months ago. So we see the purpose of Project Flytrap and the arrival of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment into Poland in terms of strengthening NATO's eastern line. However, there's also the symbolic aspect of this training exercise to consider. As the US Marines military YouTube channel points out, the United States is again demonstrating its strategic commitment to European security. That's a commitment that has been cast under no small measure of doubt in 2025. As the European Union Institute for Security Studies highlighted in a February article, the first 2 months of US President Donald Trump's tenure led to many worrying about the possibility of the US withdrawing troops from Europe and possibly pulling out of NATO. For Europe, the outlet says, the effect of the US doing this would have been as dramatic as a nuclear attack by Russia. Putin would have been rubbing his hands with glee in this scenario. About half a year after that article's publication, we now know that Trump hasn't pulled the US out of Europe. If anything, the US president seems more committed to both NATO and helping Ukraine to fight against Russia than he has been at any other point. In July, The Guardian reported that the US has signed an agreement with its NATO allies to lead large-scale arms deliveries into Ukraine, with the idea being that NATO's European members pay and the US delivers. On August 4th, NATO reported that the first package of US equipment funded under this deal, this time by the Netherlands, had arrived in Ukraine. Such extensive cooperation might have seemed impossible just a few months ago. Now, the US is demonstrating a level of strategic commitment that Russia wouldn't have expected. The divide that Putin was trying to foster has been patched up. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment arriving in Poland to take part in CUAS exercises that are clearly designed to tackle potential Russian aggression could just be the final nail in the coffin of Putin's hopes to manipulate the US into abandoning its European allies. We can say for sure that that isn't going to happen now. And that's a pretty big problem for Russia, as the US Marines military channel explains when talking about new members joining NATO and the US. When talking about new members joining NATO and the US reaffirming its commitment to the defense alliance. This new membership drastically alters Russia's military calculations in the northern region and strengthens NATO's deterrence strategy from Scandinavia to the Black Sea. The channel points out when talking about Sweden and Finland joining NATO since Putin launched his invasion. The roles Poland and the Baltic states are playing have also evolved as they're developing into training grounds and logistical hubs that will help to coordinate teams like the 2nd Cavalry Regiment if they're ever called upon to defend Europe against Russia's aggression. The message here is simple. Whatever plans Putin might have had for a war against NATO's European members have collapsed into dust. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment has just proven that the US commitment to NATO is as strong as ever at a time when the organization is welcoming new members. Russia will not face a Europe divided. It will face a version of NATO that is learning how to counter Russia's drones as it develops into a cooperative force, the likes of which Russia can't contend against. Russia will have all of this to worry about in the future. Right now, it's dealing with Ukraine managing to pull off in hours what took Western sanctions years to achieve. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of the actions NATO is taking to prepare for a fight with Russia. And thanks for watching.